Good morning, everybody. I'm Mrs. Princey, Associate Professor in Psychiatric Nursing. Yes, so each and every individual wants to be protected in one or the other way. So I am going to discuss about a topic which is called as defense mechanism. Defense mechanism is otherwise called as ego defense mechanisms or protective mechanisms. So basically, this ego defense mechanism, if you take, it is based on the theory of psychoanalytical theory, which is given by Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud is the person who has given us the three types of personality, which is the id, ego, and superego. It is the one which is going to work on the pleasure seeking principle. Ego works on the reality principle, and superego, which is working on the principle of morality. So let us see in a brief about these three types of the personality. It is the most primitive or the biological part of a person when a child is born. It is based on the principle of pleasure seeking, which will satisfy the urges or the drives of an individual to eat, drink, eliminate, and also, especially, the sexual stimulation. Ego is the one which is going to work on the principle of reality, which will act as a bridge between the id and the superego, which is going to delay the drives or the needs of the id in a socially acceptable way. Superego is the one which is working on the principle of morality, which the individual will learn from their parents or from the authorities, which is going to govern the moral principle of a person. What is right, what is wrong. So, based on that, the conscience of a person is developed. So, this is about the three basic personalities which are present in a person. So, we'll move on to the defense mechanism. Let us see the meaning of defense mechanism. Defense mechanisms are some methods which are attempted by an individual to protect oneself and cope with the basic drives or emotionally painful thoughts, feelings, or events. So these are the mechanisms which are going to help the person to protect oneself in times of stress or anxiety. Let us see what are the purposes of defense mechanism. Number one, it is going to help or eliminate the anxiety when a person is under stress. Number two, when a nurse is having the knowledge about ego defense mechanisms, it will help her to find out these mechanisms which are used by the patients, which is going to encourage her to educate the patients to adapt the correct behaviors and discourage the maladaptive behavior. Right, so this is the purpose of the defense mechanism. Let's move on to the classification of defense mechanism. According to George Wellin, we have got four types of defense mechanisms. One is narcissistic type, second one is the immature defenses, third is the neurotic defense, and the last one is the mature defenses. The narcissistic defense is used by the children and also by the adults who are psychotically disturbed. The immature defenses are used by the adolescents and also in some of the non-neurotic patients. The immature defenses are used by the adolescents as well as some adults who are under the stress. So let us see in detail about each of the defense mechanisms. The first one is the narcissistic defense, right? So the narcissistic defense mechanism includes the techniques such as denial, distortion, and projection. So what is denial? Denial is avoiding the awareness of some painful aspects of reality by negating sensory data. It is going to abolish the external reality. When I say the denial, it is simply that we are not agreeing to the reality. For example, there is a person with alcoholism So he simply denies the habit of drinking by giving the explanation or pointing out as to how well he is performing in his occupation or the job, as well as how well that he is maintaining his relationship. So here he is denying that he is a alcoholic. Right. The second defense mechanism is the distortion. So, what is distortion? It is grossly reshaping the external reality to suit the inner needs. Based on the needs of an individual, we are going to modify the external reality, right? So, it includes, conditions like hallucinations when we want to fulfill our wishes, some kind of delusions, and unrealistic megalomania. So, in these conditions, the individual will unconsciously use the defense mechanism, which is distortion. Right. The next one is projection. Projection is the mechanism by which the ego attributes its own intolerable sexual and aggressive impulses to the outside person or agency. It is simply like blaming someone else for our own mistakes. For example, there is a nurse, right, and a doctor who is performing in the OT. The doctor accidentally he stitches the wound with the sponge inside. So later on, when the question arises, right, he blames the nurse for the mistake which is done, wherein he is trying to cover his mistake. So this is one of the examples for projection. So the anxiety which the person has is being controlled or it's being managed by blaming someone else for one's own mistake. So that is about the first classification, which is narcissistic defense mechanisms. Moving on to the second type of defense mechanism, which is the immature defenses. Under the immature defenses, we have got the mechanisms like acting out, blocking, hypochondriasis, introjections, passive aggressive behavior, regression, and somatization. So let us see first one, which is the acting out. Acting out is expressing an unconscious wish or impulse through action to avoid being conscious of accompanying effect. We are going to act out our anxiety or our stress by letting it out. For example, instead of just saying, I'm angry with you for certain things, so a person just, throws an object at another person, or he throws a book or punches the hole. So these are some of the acting out behavior, which is the defense mechanism when a person is angry, he uses. Right. The next one is blocking. So what is blocking? It is the thought blocking, temporarily or transiently inhibiting the thinking process is known as blocking. The next one is the hypochondriasis. What is hypochondriasis? Exaggerating or overemphasizing an illness for the purpose of evasion and regression. A person just wants to escape from a particular situation. He overemphasizes that he is having a medical problem or an illness to protect himself from certain situations. So that is called as hypochondriasis, right? Introjection. The next one is the introjection. It is the reverse of the projection. Here, the person will internalize the qualities of an object. So here, the person is going to blame oneself for the events which is happening around him. Right. The next one is passive aggressive behavior. Here, the patients turn their anger against themselves. This phenomena, which is called as mechoism, it includes procrastinating, silly or provocating behavior, self-demeaning, clowning, or frankly self-destructive acts. It is simply like turning against one's own self. Instead of expressing the hostility towards another person, he represses this kind of a behavior because it is not socially accepted to himself. So he will turn against himself and blames his own self by self-criticism and self-accusation. The next defense mechanism is regression. Regression is going back to the previous stages of the development. It is attempt to return to the earlier libidinal phase of functioning to avoid the tension and conflicts. For example, there is an adolescent who is undergoing severe stress. He is very anxious and he is very fearful. So he will exhibit the behavior such as clinging or bedwetting or nail biting. Such behaviors are the behavior which a child will exhibit when he is under stress. So here the adolescent is exhibiting the behaviors or going back to the previous stages of development. So that is called as regression. The next one is the somatization, converting the psychic derivatives into bodily symptoms is called as somatization. Giving or converting our psychic or emotions into the bodily symptoms is called as the somatization. So, right. So that is about the immature defenses, which includes the acting out, blocking, and other defenses. Right. So moving on to the next type of the defense mechanism, which is the neurotic defense mechanisms. It includes the mechanisms such as controlling, displacement, externalization, intellectualization, isolation, rationalization, dissociation, reaction formation, and repression. The first one is controlling. So, what is controlling? It is what the individual will use to manage or regulate his environment when there is a lot of anxiety or conflicts. So that is called as controlling. The next one is the displacement. Displacement is the shifting of emotion from one object to another object. For example, there is a friend who is, very much angry. So when she is angry, if some other person comes and talks to her, she just displaces her anger to her friend, knowing that her friend is a less threatening object. So that is called as the displacement. Another example that I can quote here is when a man is angry at his boss, he comes home in the evening. Okay, he cannot show his anger to his boss, so he will displace that anger to his wife because he knows that wife is a less threatening object, right? So that is the mechanism which is displacement. The next one is the externalization. So the externalization is the defense mechanism that the individual will use to perceive the external world and the objects which are there around him as argumentative instead of he blaming himself as being argumentative. So that is called as externalization. So next one is the isolation. Isolation is splitting or separating one's own feelings or emotions into a different area. So that is called as isolation. Next one is rationalization. Rationalization is simply giving the reasons or excuses for some events or situations which the individual doesn't want to face. For example, there is a student who has failed in the examination, right? So he cannot give the reasons that he has not studied for the exam. That's the reason that he has failed. So he gives the reason which is socially acceptable, right? So he may give the reason to his parents that he was very sick. That's the reason that he is failed in the examination. Or he may just say that the teacher who was there for this particular subject has not taught the subject well. So here he is giving reasons for the failure which is socially acceptable. So that is called as rationalization. The next one is the dissociation. So dissociation is the mechanism which an individual will use to dissociate or to separate his own emotions or the feelings, just like dramatization, right? So here it can be seen in the patients who are suffering with the post-traumatic stress disorder or the somnambulism. Okay, the next one is the reaction formation. Reaction formation is the transformation of an unacceptable impulse into its opposite. So, say for example, there is a new child who is going to arrive to the family. So, the first child is the one who will always have the feeling of jealousy or the feeling of anxiety, right? So, he may just do the reaction of being over affectionate towards the younger one, or he may just be the one who is going to play an important role in supporting the newborn or welfare of the child. So here he is going to cover up his feelings of aggression, his feelings of anxiety. So that is called as reaction formation. The next one is the repression. Repression is the unconscious blocking of the unacceptable thoughts, feelings, and impulses. So, certain painful events that an individual doesn't want to remember, he will repress or push down to the level of the unconscious mind. That is called as the repression. Say, for example, a child who has been a victim of sexual abuse during the childhood period, so doesn't want to remember the painful event in her life, so she will try to push that painful event or repress that knowledge to the unconscious level of the mind. That is called as the repression. So that is all about the immature defenses. So moving on to the next one, which is the mature defenses. So under the mature defenses, we have got altruism,